Sat Sri Akal ji, Jianu, welcome to You Are Not Alone. ਅੱਜ ਦੀ topic ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, very delicate topic ਹੈਗੀ ਆ. It's about somebody who's been through alcoholism as a lady, but her husband has tragically not come through the other side the way really he should have. He sourced all the services possible and they just didn't work for him. Why? We just don't know. We don't have any answers at the moment. There's a lot of denial in this. There's lots of things that we just don't understand about this illness, even to this day. Even myself, as an early recovering alcoholic, there are certain people that I just don't understand why they get to a certain point where they can't understand why they have to continue to drink. I'd like to introduce this guest today. She has to remain anonymous due to the fact that there's been domestic abuse, there's been family disputes, there's been a lot of things going on, and she has plucked up the courage and has been brave enough to come on the show today to tell her story. I'd like to come over to you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You've been very brave to come on today, especially knowing the history that I know behind what you've been through, and obviously the interview that you've done, which we will be listening to a bit later on in the show. In your words, alcoholism in men, or whether it be women, what is your understanding of it? How do you comprehend? Because you have been, I know for a fact that you have been through probably one of the worst cases that I know. How would you comprehend it? How would you explain it? How was your feelings? What has it done to your life?
Alcoholism, I can only describe as a crippling disease that starts to take a hold of you quite slowly, something that you don't realize is creeping up on you, but then can completely take over your life and every aspect of it. It takes over your body, it takes over your mind, it takes over, it will cause you to completely lose interest in life and living and everything around it, and focus. I think people only look at the physical side of it, and they associate being drunk or being an alcoholic with the intoxication, falling about. They don't think about the mental state of that person and what can cause somebody to feel like they can't do anything but find solace in drink. When somebody gets to the point where that is all they can think about doing to make themselves feel better, what is it that makes a person get to that stage? There must already have been an underlying issue, and I think that's what a lot of people
Don't understand
and don't pay any attention to.
You've done a lot of research. You had to do a lot of research. You're doing a lot of campaigning and bits and pieces that I know of. Did you ever come to any conclusion of why he was, or let's say, what is the underlying issue? What was the underlying issue that made him get to the point that he got to?
One of the things that hurts me the most is that I still now cannot understand what the underlying issue was. I tried to speak to him so many times about what was making him feel unhappy, and I don't know, maybe he didn't know himself, but I could see that there was a feeling there of inadequacy. There was something, it was almost like he felt he'd failed, but I don't know how. I always tried to get to the bottom. Was it his work making him unhappy? Was it his family? Was it money problems? it may just have been a combination of everything. I don't think he had the lifestyle he wanted. I think he had dreams of being in a better place.
So, do you think these were aspirations that he wanted that he couldn't achieve, therefore he was trying to suppress his feelings of those by drinking?
Perhaps. It's some of the company he kept, I think. I remember him talking a lot about what other people may have achieved and may have done, and you could see there that he wanted to be better. But he, rather than striving to be better, he seemed to have almost convinced himself that he couldn't do it.
Right. So he convinced himself in his mental state that he couldn't do it, but yet you didn't know, and he didn't know what he actually wanted. It was almost as though it was like he had this picture built up in his mind, but he couldn't explain to you what he wanted, but he had an aspiration to get to a certain point in life, yet couldn't explain to you
Yeah.
exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
Now, this happens a lot with alcoholics. We have this conversation in some of the rooms sometimes. Alcoholics either live in the past or they live in the future. They don't live in the day. So when you dream about the future, you're always thinking, tomorrow I'm going to do this. Or, do you remember we tried this and this didn't work? Or they'll be sitting in a room with somebody else and talk about the past. It's never about the day. Did you find that he never ever spoke about what he was going to do on the day? Was it always about the future, or was it always about the past?
I think that's right, actually. There was a lot of talk about the future and plans and what he wanted to do. There was also talk about the past, and I remember him saying that there were career paths that he'd thought about that he wanted to take, but he wasn't able to because he felt that at quite a young age he'd had to start working to support his family, and that was something that he regretted.
So the regret of the past was haunting him to the point where he wasn't living in the present. He was still remembering the fact that when he was younger, to support family, he had to take on perhaps a job or a career to support family and forsake what he wanted to do for himself.
Yeah, that's right.
Did he ever discuss that with you?
I remember a couple of occasions where he talked about it and what he had wanted to do, but it was very much in passing then. It was a case of, well, yes, I had these ideas, I did want to do this. He talked about wanting to join the army and then said, but I couldn't do it because I had to work and I was sent away to work. But he then kind of brushed it off quite quickly, almost like he didn't want to think about it.
Denial?
Maybe, or maybe it hurt and he didn't want to bring it up again.
Didn't want to speak about it. Yeah, it's a very common thing to want to sort of brush under the carpet of how you're really, really feeling, and try and ignore your true feelings. Again, that's what alcoholics do. They'll use a substance, like I used to. You'll use the substance to suppress your feelings, to make sure that you don't remember what's going on about that, because you don't want to talk about it. And that's the worst thing you can do. In hindsight, and the research that you've done, and I know you've studied it, and I know that you know a lot about this illness now. Had he, at the time, spoken openly, honestly and clearly and concisely about what was going on in his mind, perhaps we wouldn't be having this interview today.
Maybe, yeah.
It's you've been through a very, very difficult journey. I also want to go into after we have the break, we will obviously have your interview that the viewers can watch and have a listen to what this young lady has been through. But also, I want to go into the domestic abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse that is attached to this illness. Just before we go into that, do you think, how far was he into the illness before this started to happen to you?
I think it was more a case of when I started to see the anger and his reaction to certain situations and things he didn't like, that was when I realised there was a problem. So it was the other way around. I knew he was a heavy drinker. I didn't realise how bad it was until he became unreasonable.
Right. And did this always happen at home, or was this while you were out on functions, or?
It started off at home, and then it would extend to functions towards the end of the night when he was very drunk, and certainly on the way home.
From a function?
Yes.
And this would be while you'd probably be driving?
Driving back.
Right. Would that be mental abuse? Physical abuse?
There was a lot of what I say mental abuse and emotional abuse as well. So, yeah, a lot of putting me down and not wanting me to go out anywhere for fear that I almost wonder whether his fear was that I wouldn't come back.
Right. What we're going to do, we're going to now go for a commercial break. We'll be back after the break, where we'll be hearing Nikki's interview, and we'll also be discussing further what alcoholism does to relationships. We'll see you back after the break.
When I first met my partner, we actually met when we were in college, and he was a really kind of fun, happy guy, always the life and soul of the party, liked to have a drink and have a good time. Very popular, lots of friends, and regularly went out socialising. Over the years that we got to know each other and spent more time with each other, it was clear that that was a big part of his life, going out and having fun, and there was always drink involved, to enjoy himself and enjoy ourselves. It's something that you just take it as read, or it's just normal at that time. I think when you're young and enjoying life, and you don't really think too much of it. You don't read into it. It's what everybody does. It's you're in large groups of friends, and perhaps some of it is peer pressure because you feel like it's what everyone else is doing, so you're going to do the same. So it becomes a very big part of your working life as well. I always knew that he was a heavy drinker, and I suppose looking back, the signs were there, but you don't see them at the time. So in order to have a night out, for example, he would always have to have a drink, but not just one or two. He used to drink till he was very drunk, so it was always a case of ending the night completely intoxicated, and then struggling to get home and not wanting the night to end. So it was never a case of going home early or on time, just wanted it to carry on. Always very drunk, and then typically spending the next day getting over it, or with a very bad hangover, bad headache, and sleeping off most of the day. But as I said, when you're young, you don't really think too much of it. And then when we got married, I think it was only then that you start to realise just how much a part the drink plays in someone's life. So after we got married, I started to realise, for example, that when we went to weddings and events, it was a case that drink seemed to be the most important thing there. It wasn't even about the people you were seeing or the event or spending time with each other. It was more about all the guys getting together and drinking as much as they could. It almost felt like a competition sometimes to see who could drink who under the table, who could tolerate the most, who could have the most shots. And so it became a pattern. It almost started to feel like it was normal. Every time you'd go to an event, you knew that you had to be the one driving at the end of the night, because all the men would be completely drunk, having spent all evening, all day like that. Typically as well, when you go out with each other, it doesn't become about the company anymore. It becomes more about getting the buzz. And so I found that with my husband, it was all about drinking lots very quickly to get that feel and get the buzz and get the high-spiritedness that he needed to feel like he was having a good time. It was almost as if he couldn't enjoy himself without having the buzz there and without having that feeling of intoxication. And it grows, but it's the kind of thing that creeps up on you and you don't notice it at all. Like I said, it seems to be normal, and particularly I think when the whole family is like that, extended family as well. I remember thinking that the men of the family were all very heavy drinkers. It was every time they got together, the first thing they would do was get the bottles out and lay them on the table and work their way through them. And it wasn't even just have a couple of drinks and enjoy yourself. It was, let's see how many of these we can finish and still be standing at the end of the night. And it continues like that. I also remember references to people, to men in the family that didn't drink, and they were very much seen as almost as if they weren't men. So they were mocked for not drinking, they were mocked for not wanting to partake in that. It seemed that in the family, your manliness was measured by how much you could drink and how much you could hold. And it starts to have an impact on every time you go to an event, because you find that the men and women immediately are segregated. Your families don't mix. The men are on the one side getting drunk and the women are on the other, having a chat, having a dance, looking after the children, and that becomes normal. As it got worse with my husband, I found that every weekend he would want to be out with his friends drinking again, and the times that he would come home would get later and later. He would be in a worse state every time. There was never a time he came back and had just enjoyed himself. He always came back and collapsed into bed almost, and then spent the rest of the weekend trying to recover from it. The nights started to run into the days, so he'd go for a night out, he wouldn't come back till the next morning. I heard about them having lock-ins in pubs where they would drink all night into the morning, into the next day. And then as that starts to get worse, it gets to the point where sometimes they're not coming back until 1 or 2 days later. When I tried to raise it and I tried to question it, I remember, my husband always said, well, we're just having a good time, we're just enjoying ourselves. It's just a way of unwinding. Once when we've been at work all week, we want to meet up, have a good time, there's nothing more, it's normal. And I remember thinking, but you should come home at a reasonable time, and you should be able to spend time with me or your family, all of us, and have the rest of the weekend. It's when you're working all week and then you're spending all weekend intoxicated, it starts to get to the point where it's not much of a life. When you try and raise it with other people, you find that a lot of the other guys then immediately assume that you're a nagging wife. So, why are you saying it to him? Why are you not letting him enjoy himself? Why can he not have a drink? You women are typical. You want them to be at home all the time. You don't want them to enjoy themselves. But it struck me that these guys, they found it acceptable to spend all their time drinking, not spend any time with their families and partners. But they didn't seem to see that there was a fine line between enjoying yourself and taking it a little bit too far and getting to the point where it controls all your spare time and controls all your social events. Whenever you try to raise it as a wife, you're seen as being a bit of a party pooper, like you're trying to destroy your husband's fun and keep him henpecked. And you then feel like you can't say anything because your husband's complaining that you don't let him enjoy himself. His friends or his family are complaining that you're nagging him. And you're thinking, well, where do I fit into all of this? Because nobody seems to care about my feelings and how it affects me. It puts a strain on your relationship. And that's what people fail to see, is that when you enter into a marriage, you enter into what you think is going to be a partnership and an equal one. And you think you're going to spend time together and build a life together. But with something like drink, although it may start off as a bit of fun and a social event, it very quickly escalates into something that is needed and something that takes over all parts of a person's life. My husband's drinking got much heavier, and like I said, he was spending nights out, not coming back till the next day, and it got to the point where when we would go to weddings, it was embarrassing because you knew that he was going to get really drunk. You knew he was going to make a fool of himself. You knew that by the end of the night he probably couldn't stand up. You'd have to get somebody to take him to the car for you and sit him in there because he wasn't able to make his own way. What people don't see when they're drinking this much is that the friends that start drinking with them or have been drinking with them all that time, they then start to pull back and withdraw, because when you're drinking and you get to the point where you can't handle yourself at the end of the night or you're paralytic, they don't want the responsibility. They don't want to be the ones to look after you or pick you up, so they'll then start withdrawing. So you think you're sitting there having a good time with these people, not realizing that as you're getting more and more drunk, these people are laughing at you, and they're nudging each other and saying, oh, there he goes again. He's going to make a fool of himself again. Someone's going to have to carry him home again. And this is one of the things I tried to get across to him, was these people who you think are your friends, they're there as long as it suits them, and they're there as long as you drink with them, you have the same habits, and you're on a par with each other. But as soon as it becomes an issue for you and you can't handle it anymore, they don't really want to know. And you then become the butt of their jokes, their humor. You become something for them to talk about and to laugh at. I tried to speak to him directly, and it just fell on deaf ears. He just thought I was being unreasonable and that I didn't want him to enjoy himself. And you get to the point then where you start to doubt yourself and you think, well, am I asking too much? Maybe I should just let him have that time so that he can unwind and relax and get drunk. Funny thing is, when you want to go out with your friends and have a similar evening, they don't like it then. That's not acceptable. I tried, as it got worse, speaking to his family, and the answer I would get every time was, he's a man, that's what men do. He's Punjabi, that's what they do, they drink, it's normal. And every time I was made to feel like I was almost like I was being mad, by raising it. You know, why would you raise it? Why would you have a problem with it? That's what men do. They drink, they enjoy themselves. Get over it. You need to deal with it. And you then wonder what else there is to life, and why they can't see beyond that. You know, the consequences of alcohol really come in quite slowly, I think. I don't think you notice them immediately. You may start to find it has an impact on your health. With my husband, he did start to suffer quite badly with a number of ailments. He had rapid weight loss. I remember it started to discolor his skin. You know, you get a very kind of yellow, almost jaundiced look about you. The whites of your eyes become yellow. Your eyes are bloodshot all the time. And those kinds of physical symptoms that you can see in a person when they've been drinking too much became more and more frequent, to the point where they're starting to look like that all the time. They start to lose their appetite. They don't have, or they eat to fill themselves, but they don't have enjoyment in food anymore. So it's more when they've had a drink, they get peckish, so they'll eat to excess whatever's available. But they start to lose focus in everything else, and they start to lose interest in other aspects of life. Nothing else matters. Suddenly your family life doesn't matter, your work doesn't matter. You don't have any real aspirations in life. It becomes that where you may have been planning for a future and trying to build something up for yourself, you don't do that anymore, because you're thinking more about your next social event or your next party or the next time you're going to be able to drink. And you start to have a very short-sighted view on life. With my husband, then it became such that he couldn't enjoy his weekends any other way apart from drinking. And the drinking then creeps into the week. It's not just the weekends. It's then every evening after work. You know, I've had a hard day at work, I'm tired, I need a drink to relax, or I need a drink to wind down. And I'd find piles of cans by the dustbin, probably about 2 or 3 hours after he'd been home, easily get through 6 to 8 cans. And then that's not enough. You then have to start on the bottles and the shots. So a few cans of beer and then a couple of shots on top. And then you get to the point where you think, okay, I'm relaxed enough, I can go to sleep. The occasional shots become quarter bottles. And before you know it, you're having an excessive amount of alcohol every night, and then you're getting up the next morning and still functioning and still managing to go to work, still not thinking there's a problem. The issue with alcoholics is, while they're functioning and they can still get up and go to work, and they can still do other things, they can still do the shopping on the weekend, they can still talk to people, attend events, they think they're okay, and they don't think it's the problem. What they don't take into consideration is, if they can't have an evening at home without knocking back a few cans and a few bottles, it's already a problem. If you can't go somewhere to an event and decide to have a soft drink, have a juice for a change, if you're not able to do that, it's already become a problem. With the physical side of your health deteriorating when you're having that, the other thing I noticed in my husband was things like, as the drink got worse, as his habit became worse, it was things like not being able to hold a conversation, not being able to speak clearly, getting your words mixed up, losing your memory and forgetting simple things. Eventually, we must have been married about 5 or 6 years before he became extremely ill. He had problems with his liver, he had problems with his pancreas, he had problems with digesting food, he became diabetic, all of these things needing him to then become an outpatient at the hospital and go into regular appointments, take insulin on a daily basis. But he continued to drink, and in fact, I think it made it worse, because now that he was ill, he was starting to feel sorry for himself, like he had a very hard life. So he was drinking then to kind of get rid of the sadness at being unwell, or that feeling of being unwell. And by doing that, you just end up in a vicious circle, because it's the drink that's making you ill, but you're then having more and more of it to try and make you feel better mentally, because you're no longer happy. He wasn't happy. I could see he wasn't happy. But I think somewhere he knew that he was failing as a husband and a father. And that made him sad, and it made him drink more. It puts such a strain on your relationship, where you don't really have a relationship anymore. You're not able to talk to each other about things. We couldn't come back from work and discuss that day, because he would be straight there reaching for the alcohol. And I would just keep quiet, because if I said something, he would say I was nagging. And he would get angry and annoyed. And that's the other thing that increased with his alcohol intake, is his tolerance levels dropped completely. He became a lot more annoyed and frustrated whenever I would say anything, or if anybody would mention his drinking habit. It made him quite angry, and he started to snap and bite back and be quite vicious sometimes in things he would say. And you then you don't say anything to them, because you don't want to cause an argument. He didn't help himself in that way, and he got into this mental state then where he wasn't happy with how his life was, but he wouldn't do anything about it either. He would just keep drinking. He went I tried to get him help on many occasions, counselling. I tried to get him to speak to people in the family. I took him to the doctors and hospital, and I tried to, my biggest problem was trying to get him to admit he had a problem, because he couldn't see it. He now was drinking all day, not just in the evenings. He was getting up in the mornings and he was having a drink. He thought I didn't know. He thought he was hiding it. Alcoholics think that they're hiding it really well, but when they're that bad, you can see straight through them. You can see the piles of bottles and cans that they're hiding in various parts of the house. Sometimes I'd go outside and they'd be hidden in the bush. The car he drove for work, he'd keep a stash of alcohol in there. When he came home in the evening, he'd then say, "Oh, I just need to pop out to the car, I've left something there." And I'd watch him from the window, and he would knock back. He could knock back a quarter bottle of vodka in a couple of minutes, and then come back into the house and barely stand up. And then it would be a case of, "Oh, do you know what? I'm really tired. I'm going to go to sleep." And I would be there thinking, "I've just seen what you've done. You've just been out there, and you've just had so much to drink that you've come back in and you can't even hold yourself up anymore." It got to the point where I don't remember seeing him sober. He couldn't work anymore. He stopped working. How could he? He was drunk all the time. He would spend all his time in the bedroom, in bed, tucked up in there, and there would be bottles and cans that he would hide under the mattress and under the bed that he would drink during the day, or every time I popped out to, if I was at work, he would be drinking them. Even if I stepped out of the bedroom downstairs into the kitchen to do something, he would be quickly knocking it back and putting the bottle back. And the only time it got to the point where he would only get out of bed to use the bathroom or to eat something if he got the munchies, as it was. He wasn't even eating properly. He didn't have a proper diet. It was a case of eating because he felt hungry, and he would just pick the first thing up that he saw, just to fulfill his basic requirements. Skin on bones. He couldn't even carry himself anymore because he was becoming so frail. But he had no desire to stop drinking, and he still didn't think he had a problem. The family still didn't think he had a problem and still kept blaming, well, he had turned to blaming me. And now saying that, you know, I shouldn't speak, I shouldn't say anything because I was provoking him. If I would speak up and I would complain about his drinking, then I was provoking him and I was causing it. And I should learn that when a man has a drink, you need to, as a woman, be quiet and not say anything, not antagonize them. And these were the people that I was trying to deal with and trying to explain that this is a disease that has crept up on him and is killing him. But nobody wanted to listen.
Gianna, welcome to the second part of the show. As you've just seen, and we've played the interview that this young lady has done anonymously about her life. It's been a very, very emotional interview. She's had to stay anonymous due to a number of reasons, reasons that some of you viewers may understand. Some of you viewers probably think, well, why is it? Why? Because one, the stigma that is attached to this problem. Two, because of family. Three, because some people don't want to discuss it openly, but they do want to raise awareness. Now, going back to yourself, you know, I'll introduce you as Miss X. We started off the first part of it with the mental abuse and domestic abuse that started to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we were talking about what was happening in a situation in a car before the commercial break. Now, what impact did that have on yourself? Obviously the children must have been, but they must have been in the car.
Yes.
What impact did that have, and how did it make you feel? How did it...
I only had one child at the time who was in the back of the car. I was driving home and he was being verbally quite vicious, shouting, snapping, saying quite nasty things because of the level he'd had to drink. I actually don't remember what he was saying. It was quite abusive, lots of swearing, and I think it was just his general anger. There wasn't anything in particular I had done. However, saying that, I think when you're an alcoholic and when you've had that much drink, you don't need to say very much to antagonise somebody like that. So had I have just complained about how much he'd had and said you shouldn't have had that, that would have been enough to set him off. There was one particular occasion where he had blackouts regularly, but you don't know at the time. It's only the next day when they say that they have no recollection of the last few hours of the day. That's when you realise they've had a blackout. So this was one of those occasions where he'd actually mistaken me for somebody else in the car and then started to hit out while I was driving the car. The impact of that, clearly there's a danger because I'm trying to drive at the time, and you can't drive a car while somebody's actually lashing out at you. So I pulled over, jumped out, went straight to the back to get my child out, and ran down the road. We weren't actually that far from home at the time, so I didn't get back into that car. The next day, he had no recollection of even leaving the event and getting into the car with me, and so hadn't realised what he'd done. But I do remember at the time when he was lashing out, he was calling me someone else. And this happened on probably about 2 or 3 occasions where he lashed out and he thought I was another person. So
this person that he thought that you were,
yeah,
that he kept mentioning, was it the same person every time?
No, it was different people. And I remember once it being a man, and it was like he was arguing with this man, thinking it was me. And then fighting with this person, not realising it was me he was fighting with.
So it's almost like alcohol psychosis?
Yes.
Right, okay. Now, obviously you've been through a lot. You've been through a lot, even going through the interview that we've just watched. It's very emotional. There's a lot more you want to say. However, after you've studied alcoholism and you're trying to raise awareness of this disease at the moment, but you're having to do it in a very anonymous way, what would your advice be to people out there? I mean, you know, should people be suffering in silence?
Absolutely not. Definitely not. It's two-way, really. It's for the person who is starting to drink excessively. I think as an individual you have to start taking note of when you are craving that drink and you need that drink to have an evening out. If you cannot have an evening with soft drinks and you can't enjoy yourself in the same way, you need to question whether it's becoming a habit, because it's very quick that habit then becomes a dependency, and it's such a fine line, and that person themselves won't realise. For all the people who are living with somebody in that situation, you should never suffer in silence. You need to talk initially to that person and explain their behaviour and explain how it makes you feel and that it's not right. If that doesn't work, then it should be the case that you can talk to a family member in confidence and try and get their support.
How did you get on with your GP?
The GP was actually very supportive. When we went to the GP, they were very quick, or he was very quick to start talking about resources and bringing out contact numbers. They gave us support group details. They referred my husband to the hospital. So yes, definitely a good way to go.
Definitely a good way to go. We always say your first port of call should be your general practitioner. Get in touch with them and say, look, I've got a problem. Because there's a lot of stigma attached around this. Some people want to go for private home detoxifications, but these don't work for everybody unless the underlying issue is clear. You need the support mechanism. You need to have it clear from day one, the day you decide that you're going to stop. Number one, why you're drinking. Number two, what support mechanisms you're going to have once you have some kind of detoxification and you're clear about it. And number three, are you going to continue sobriety? Some people do it to just cut down.
Yeah.
But in our community, I've found that when people get to this point, it's either all or nothing. In your case, with your husband, he just did not want to stop.
No. And the other unfortunate thing was that, talking about society, because they're in such denial that alcoholism is even a thing, when we would say, look, he's been in rehab, he cannot touch a drop, they were very much of the opinion, well, no, that means he can't have hard spirits, however, he can have beers. And that was another obstacle that we were dealing with. He was quite happy to take them. And for me to try and explain to these people, no, it means you cannot touch alcohol ever, they just did not understand that concept at all. It was a case of, no, you can drink at home, but you can't drink outside. Or you can drink cans, but you can't drink vodka. They just don't understand no alcohol.
Alcohol is alcohol, regardless of what it is. Whether you have a can of beer or you drink, what do people do these days? Half a bottle of vodka, or, you know, some people buy cans which are 9%, which is the equivalent of maybe drinking a quarter bottle of vodka. Alcohol is alcohol. It doesn't matter. Abstinence, if you decide you're going to go down the abstinence route, then these things happen. Relapses do happen.
Yes.
Relapse prevention is another matter. I've had relapses. You know, it's quite open. But it's not a case of, once you decide that you don't want to do it, you'll do it, you'll have a drink, but it'll happen when you're going through a very, very, very bad phase or whatever. And as soon as you've done it and you realise you've done it, you think, what did I do that for? And you stop again. But those mechanisms that are in place for that, certain people have got them, certain people haven't. I think in your partner's case, it was, I think he'd given up, hadn't he? He just didn't want it anymore. It was almost like it was, even the help and the resources that were there for him, he'd got to a point where there was something in his mind that he was suppressing so deep down that he just did not know how to cope. And it's such a sad thing to see. And there's probably people out there watching now at the moment thinking, my son's in this situation, my daughter, my uncle, my niece, my nephew. The numbers are on your screen. The email is on your screen. Email in. We'll put you in touch with the right people that can help you. You know, you're not alone. There are a lot of services out there that are available that we can put you in touch with. But please do not feel that you are alone, because you are not alone. This young lady has come on today and she's proved that she fought through it, went through the whole process, did everything. The end result was death. Now, we've got only a few moments left to the end of this show. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it back over to this young lady, and I want to put a message out to all those people that may be at home suffering in silence. Do you like to carry on? Sure, camera.
Please don't sit back and suffer in silence and think that there is nobody there to listen to you. There is always someone, and whether it's a friend or a family member, or you go to a professional, particularly if you go to a professional, they will not judge you. They've seen this day in and day out on so many occasions. But if you are willing to take that help and make that first step, there are people there that will gladly put aside their time and help you.
Thank you very much for that. From us here at the Call Channel, always remember that you are not alone. The Sade Valo, Pyar Bhari Sat Sri Akal. Pick up those phones or use the email address that's on your screen, and let's not be alone, because you are not alone, and let's fight this battle together.